Welcome to the deep dive. We've got some really interesting material you sent over this week. Excerpts digging into mindset, success, overcoming obstacles.
That's right. Really powerful stuff.
So for this deep dive, we thought we'd just cut right to it. Let's understand and, maybe tackle those mental roadblocks that the source talks about, the ones that often seem to hold us back.
Exactly. Think of this as maybe a shortcut, a way to quickly grasp these core ideas presented in the material about fear and indecision, doubt.
And negative influences, too.
Yeah, those two.
Yeah.
All based on what you shared. We want to explore how these things might actually be affecting your progress, often without you even realizing it.
Okay, so let's dive in then. The source, it really kicks off by identifying what it calls the unholy trio. That's indecision, doubt, and fear.
Mm-hmm. And it frames them as, like, the fundamental enemies you face when you're trying to achieve something significant.
What struck me is how connected they are. It's not just three separate things. Indecision is presented as the seed, almost.
That's a great way to put it. The seedling analogy is right there in the text. Indecision plants the seed for doubt.
And then those two, indecision and doubt, they kind of blend together.
They blend, they grow, and eventually they morph into fear. And a key point the source makes is how slow this process can be. It often happens under the radar.
Right, you don't necessarily notice it day to day.
Exactly. Which makes them particularly dangerous, They can take root before you're fully aware.
Like a slow leak undermining a foundation.
Okay. So from that trio, it moves into what it calls the 6 basic fears.
Yes. The idea here is that pretty much all human fears boil down to these 6 fundamental ones. Any other fear you can think of. It argues it's probably a variation of one of these main 6.
Okay, let's list them. It gives them in order of how common they supposedly are. First, poverty, then criticism, ill health, loss of love, old age, and finally, death. It's quite the lineup, isn't it? Real heavy hitters, as you said.
Definitely. And it even puts them in historical context, which I found interesting.
Yeah, like how the fear of poverty was maybe particularly strong during the Great Depression. Makes sense.
Or the fear of death during, say, World War I, and then maybe fear of ill health becoming more prominent after that.
It shows how these underlying fears can kind of surface or become amplified by what's happening in the wider world.
But here's the really crucial part, I think. The source makes this bold claim. Fears are just states of mind.
That's the core concept right there, because they exist in the mind.
They are subject to our control. We can manage them, direct them even.
Yeah.
That feels empowering.
It really is. And it connects to this idea that our thoughts, whether they're conscious thoughts we generate ourselves or thoughts we pick up from outside.
Like influences from others.
Exactly. Those thoughts have real effects. They can shape our reality, our destiny, as the source puts it, both the voluntary thoughts and the involuntary ones.
So it's not just about managing our own negative self-talk. We also need to be aware of what the source calls tramp thought impulses.
Right. Negative ideas kind of drifting in from other people. The suggestion is we can build a sort of mental filter.
Like choosing what news you consume, but for thoughts?
Kind of, yeah. Being selective about what you let take root in your mind.
Yeah.
The source argues nature gave us absolute control over only one thing.
Our thoughts.
Our thoughts. And since everything we create starts as a thought, mastering that seems pretty fundamental to overcoming fear, doesn't it?
It follows logically. If thoughts tend to become physical reality, as the source claims, then constantly thinking thoughts of fear or lack probably isn't going to lead you to courage and abundance.
You wouldn't expect a rose garden if you only planted weeds. Right? It has that kind of principle.
Which brings us neatly to digging into that first fear, the fear of poverty. The source really doesn't hold back on this one, calls it the most destructive.
And the hardest one to master.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's presented as a major, major hurdle.
It even gives this, kind of provocative origin story for it. Suggests it comes from an inherited tendency to prey upon others economically.
That is quite blunt, isn't it?
Yeah.
It reflects the text's view of kind of money madness gripping society.
And it draws this stark line in the sand. There can be no compromise between poverty and riches.
Right. The paths lead in opposite directions, it says. You have to choose. It really pushes the idea of needing a definite aim for something more than just getting by.
And the symptoms it lists for this fear. It's not just about being short on cash. It's a whole mindset.
Definitely. Indifference comes first, like a lack of ambition, laziness, just accepting things.
Without protest, yeah. Then indecision, letting others think for you.
Which connects back to that unholy trio. Then doubt, making excuses, being envious, criticizing others.
Then worry, Always finding fault, maybe spending too much, neglecting appearance, nervousness.
Overcaution is another one, focusing only on failure, always waiting for the perfect time that never comes. General negativity.
And finally, procrastination.
Hmm.
Putting things off, avoiding responsibility, compromising too easily, almost expecting poverty.
It's a whole constellation of behaviors and attitudes, all feeding into this fear. And they reinforce each other, you see. Indecision leads to missed chances, which fuels worry.
Which makes you more cautious, so you procrastinate. Yeah, it's a cycle.
Exactly. There's even a quote included from Westbrook Pegler about how being broke just crushes your spirit.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. How it affects your posture, how people look at you. It makes the psychological weight really tangible.
It does. It underlines that overcoming this fear isn't just about money. It's about self-respect, about potential.
Okay, so number 2 on the list, the fear of criticism.
Another big one. The source suggests its origin might be in trying to justify taking things from others by criticizing them, finding fault to make yourself feel better about it.
That's a cynical take, maybe, but it makes you think.
It does, and it points out how this fear shows up in really small ways, like chasing fashion trends.
Right. The constant change in clothing styles, cars, driven by manufacturers playing on that fear of not fitting in, of being criticized.
But it also hits on much deeper stuff, like being afraid to express your own beliefs, especially maybe religious or spiritual ones. It mentions historical persecution.
Yeah, the fear of being judged or ostracized for thinking differently.
And the damage this fear can do. The source lists things like robbing you of initiative, killing your imagination.
Limiting your individuality, taking away self-reliance.
Absolutely. It even uses the example of parents being overly critical and causing, lasting damage to a child's confidence. That really hits home.
It does. And the symptoms listed for this fear. Self-consciousness is one, nervousness, timidity.
Lack of poise, shaky voice, fidgeting, poor posture, maybe a bad memory when under pressure.
Weak personality can't make decisions, avoids taking a stand.
Inferiority complex, sometimes showing up as bragging or trying too hard to imitate others.
Extravagance, that keeping up with the Joneses thing. Spending money, you don't have to avoid criticism.
Lack of initiative, scared to share opinions, always hesitating.
And lack of ambition, just kind of drifting, easily influenced, maybe criticizing others behind their backs because you're afraid to do it openly.
Again, it's a whole pattern that really holds people back.
Okay, next up. Fear of ill health. Where does that come from, according to the source?
It points to a mix of things: physical heredity, social conditioning. Plus, it's naturally linked to fears of getting old and ultimately death.
And it also calls out unethical health sellers. People who profit from scaring us about illness.
Exactly, playing on those existing fears. But the really key idea here is about the mind-body connection.
You mean the idea that fearing a disease can actually help bring on the symptoms?
Precisely. The power of suggestion. It mentions an experiment where people were made to feel sick just by being told they looked unwell.
Wow. It makes you wonder how much our expectations shape our physical experience.
Right. The source even goes so far as to suggest that negative thoughts can be the start of an actual physical illness. That's a pretty strong claim about mental influence.
It really is. So what are the signs, the symptoms of this fear?
Well, there's inappropriate autosuggestion, basically. Expecting to be sick, always looking for symptoms, maybe jumping on every new health fad.
Hypochondria, constantly talking about illness, maybe having vague nervous conditions.
Lack of exercise, often because you're afraid activity might harm you, ironically.
Susceptibility, the fear itself seems to weaken your natural resistance, making you more prone to catching things.
Self-coddling, kind of enjoying the sympathy that comes with being unwell, or using minor ailments to avoid responsibilities.
And intemperance, using alcohol or drugs to mask pain instead of addressing the cause, or maybe just obsessively consuming health information.
It paints a picture of being tracked by health worries. But there's that little anecdote, too.
Oh, the young man whose illness just vanished when he fell in love.
Yeah. It's a simple story, but it illustrates how a powerful shift in focus and mental state can have dramatic physical effects.
Interesting. Okay, number 4, fear of loss of love.
The source traces this back to, well, early human behavior. Suggests maybe roots in male polygamy and female needs for protection and maternal instincts.
And it labels this one as possibly the most painful of all 6 fears.
Which makes sense emotionally. Losing love or the fear of it can cause immense mental and even physical pain.
It talks about how the expression of this fear has changed from maybe more brute force in the past
Right, like physical competition.
to more subtle things today like persuasion, manipulation, maybe even just emotional blackmail.
Exactly, more psychological tactics. And it notes that women might be more susceptible, historically speaking.
Due to social roles and experiences, perhaps, and the symptoms. Jealousy is a big one.
Huge. Suspicion without cause, constantly accusing partners,
Fault. Finding always criticizing loved ones, pushing them away out of fear.
and even gambling, which seems odd at first, but the source connects it to taking wild risks, maybe to try and provide for loved ones in a desperate way, driven by that fear of inadequacy or loss.
That's a connection I wouldn't have immediately made. Okay, fifth fear. Old age.
Yeah, the fear of getting older. The source points to two main drivers here. One is practical.
Fear of poverty and old age. Not having enough to live on.
Exactly. And the other is more existential. Negative teachings about death and the afterlife, making old age seem like just a grim waiting room.
Plus, things like fear of ill health creeping in again. Maybe losing physical attractiveness.
And the big one, losing freedom and independence. That's a major source of anxiety for many people as they age.
What are the symptoms it lists for this one?
A tendency to slow down, maybe develop an inferiority complex, often around the age of 50, according to the text.
Making excuses like I'm too old for that.
Right. Apologetically referring to oneself as old. And this mindset, it argues, kills initiative, dampens imagination.
It also mentions dressing inappropriately to try and look younger, which often backfires.
Yeah, trying too hard, coming across as inauthentic, which stems from that underlying fear and resistance to the natural process.
All right, the last of the six, the fear of death.
The big one. The source puts a lot of the blame for this fear on religious fanaticism, those old fire and brimstone teachings.
Creating fear around the unknown, about punishment after death.
Exactly. And it points out, quite pragmatically, that nobody really knows what happens after death. There's no proof of heaven or hell in the way they were often described.
Which leaves room for that fear to be exploited.
But it also notes, optimistically perhaps, that this fear seems less potent today. Maybe because of science, changing beliefs.
And it makes the logical point, fearing death is kind of useless, isn't it? It's inevitable for everyone.
Right. Why spend energy fearing the unavoidable? It offers a different perspective, thinking of life as energy.
And energy can't be destroyed, only transformed. So death isn't an end, but maybe a transition.
That's the idea presented, a potentially more comforting way to view it. The main symptom it identifies for this fear is
thinking about dying instead of living.
Yes, often linked to a lack of purpose or meaning in life now. If you're not engaged with living, your mind might drift towards worrying about ending.
And the remedy.
The greatest remedy, it says, is having a burning desire for achievement, being deeply involved in something meaningful, serving others.
That keeps you focused on life, on the present.
Exactly. It anchors you in the now.
Okay, so that covers the six fears. But then the source shifts slightly to talk specifically about worry.
Right. It defines worry as a state of mind that's built on fear, but specifically fueled by indecision.
So back to indecision again. It's a recurring theme.
It really is. And worry is described as insidious. It creeps in, paralyzes your ability to reason clearly, destroys confidence.
It even uses those slightly funny terms forenza and worryitis, like they're contagious mental illnesses.
Yeah. But the point is serious. Worry can spread and take hold. And the antidote?
Decision. Prompt and firm decision.
That's the cure proposed. Make a choice. Take a stand. It used that really striking anecdote.
The person on death row.
Yeah. Who found peace only after they made the decision to accept their fate. It stopped the mental torture of what if.
So decision-making isn't just about moving forward. It's about finding peace now, even in difficult circumstances. It stops you from passively accepting things you don't want.
Exactly. And it outlines how you can use decision to tackle each of the six fears.
Like deciding to accept death is inevitable, so stop worrying about it.
Or deciding to manage your money wisely without constant anxiety about poverty.
Decide to ignore unfair criticism. Decide to embrace aging as potentially valuable.
Decide to focus on wellness, not symptoms. Decide to be self-reliant in love if you have to.
It's about making conscious choices not to be ruled by these fears.
Right. And the ultimate conclusion there is that making a kind of blanket decision, I refuse to worry, can bring poise, peace of mind, and happiness.
That's a powerful idea. But wait, there's more, isn't there? It introduces a seventh basic evil.
Yes. This is presented as something even deeper, potentially more dangerous than the six fears themselves. It's susceptibility to negative influences.
Okay, how is that different?
Think of it as the fertile ground, the rich soil, where the seeds of failure, including those fears, can easily grow.
So it's about our vulnerability to negativity.
Exactly. And the source stresses that successful people actively build defenses against this. They protect their minds.
And it's subtle, right, intangible, a state of mind itself.
Very subtle. It can creep in from other people, negative comments, gossip, pessimism, or can come from within, from our own doubts feeding on external cues.
So how do you protect yourself? What strategies does it suggest?
Several things. Use your willpower consciously. Recognize your own tendencies towards maybe laziness or being easily swayed.
Actively counteract the 6 fears we just talked about.
Guard your subconscious mind. Be careful what you let sink in deeply. Make a deliberate effort to avoid negative people.
Stop coddling illness or complaining constantly.
Seek out positive people, people who think for themselves. And crucially, stop expecting trouble. Don't look for the negative.
It mentions some self-analysis test questions in the source, too, as a way to see where you might be most vulnerable.
Yes, a tool for self-awareness regarding this susceptibility.
Which brings us toward the end, focusing on mind control. It circles back to that core idea.
It really hammers this home.
Yeah.
The ability to have absolute control over your own thoughts is presented as the most significant, most inspiring fact of all.
And it warns you not to be careless with this spiritual estate, your mind.
Don't let just anything wander in and set up shop. It uses examples.
Edison, Woolworth, George Washington, Henry Ford.
Right. People who supposedly faced a lot of negativity or doubt from others, but they held on to their own vision, controlled their own minds, and succeeded because of it.
And then it introduces, this quite a list, 57 famous alibis.
Haha, yeah. Basically, all the excuses people use for why they haven't succeeded. If only I had money. If only I had education. I'm too old. I'm too young.
The point being,
that alibis explain failure. They might make you feel better temporarily, but they never lead to success. They're dead ends.
And making excuses is a habit, a deeply rooted one for many.
A habit that needs to be consciously broken. The source uses this final analogy. Life is like a game, a race against time.
An indecision, relying on alibis.
Yeah.
That means you lose the game, you run out of time.
But then it offers the solution. It declares all those past alibis obsolete, irrelevant now, because you, the listener, have been given the master key.
Which is?
The ability, the privilege, of creating a burning desire for a definite goal, a definite form of riches, which could mean more than just money.
And the choice is yours. The price of not using that key is failure.
But the reward for using it, for taking control, for being decisive, is the satisfaction of conquering yourself, mastering those fears and influences.
So wrapping this all up then, the core message from this material seems pretty clear.
Yeah, I think so. Recognizing these basic fears, understanding how they work.
And actively working to master them, while also guarding yourself against those negative influences.
Those are crucial steps if you want to achieve your goals, whatever they may be.
It all comes back to that power of controlling your own thoughts and the importance of making clear, firm decisions.
Absolutely. Taking charge of your inner world.
So maybe the final thought for you listening right now is this. As you heard us discuss these fears, these influences, did any particular one jump out at you?
Which one resonates most strongly with your own experience, perhaps?
And thinking about that, what's maybe one small, decisive step you could actually take, maybe even today, to start mastering it?
Just one step. That's often all it takes to begin shifting things. It's definitely something I'm all over.
We really hope this deep dive has given you some valuable food for thought, drawing from the material you shared with us.